Alright, welcome back to Urban Toolworks. My name is Jeremy Tomlinson. I want to talk about sharpening today, and we'll start off by discussing stones, and at least the stones that we use. There are many stones out there that you could choose from: natural stones, man-made stones, clay stones, ceramic stones, but we won't get into all of them, just the ones that we typically deal with here at the school. So right now I have two Sharpening glass stones. Now the glass stone is a ceramic stone that's bonded to a piece of tempered glass. And in this hand I have 1,000 grit stone that has been used up over quite some time, and you can see it's getting really thin. The actual stone thickness here on the glass, you can see, is very thin. And if you had a regular clay stone like this stone here that was this thin, you could appreciate it would break in no time flat. But with the Sharpening stones, because they are bonded to this plate glass backing, you can wear them down until there's only 0.5 millimeter left of stone surface. As long as there's abrasive surface left, you can still use it. Let's get to the sharpening process in general. So typically we use a honing guide. There are typically copies of the original Eclipse guide that was designed and made in the UK. These work really well. They have their faults, they have their weaknesses, but in general, for the money, you can hardly beat them. So coupled with that is a board which acts as our angle setting jig and also holds the stones. Now, sharpening do's and don'ts, shall we say. One of the big don'ts is not to have a consistent angle when you're honing. So let's just go and look at the very basics of this. Here is a hand plane iron. This comes from this little record number 3. This blade, we refer to it here as the top, the back, and the bevel. Now, this wide bevel you see here is the primary bevel. And if you look closer, you might see a little bright line right at the very edge. That is the secondary bevel. Typically, we're honing or sharpening only on that secondary bevel. That secondary bevel is a narrow little line indicating that it is a steeper angle than the primary. The primary angle is typically about 25 degrees, and the secondary is about 30. In our shop and in the school, we typically prefer that all of our hand plane irons are used with a standard angle of 30 degrees. For difficult fiber using bevel up planes, we use 45 degrees, but for most average use, 30 degrees is a good angle for us. So when I insert the blade in the honing guide keeps the blade locked in place for a consistent angle. Now I want you to contemplate this with me. If the blade is extending out the front of the guide by a lot, at the angle here to the bench will be small. If the blade is projecting just a little, the angle is much steeper. So 30 degrees is a distance in between those 2 points somewhere, and all we need to know is the distance from the front of the honing guide to the front of the blade and calibrate that to our desired angle. Now we make this little board. You can just as well make it out of some scrap, but many times we are asked, would you make us one? And this little board has a bunch of stops, a place to hold the stone, and the way these stops work is this. I'm wanting 30 degrees on this blade, so I extend the blade out quite a bit and tighten it finger tight and push it up to the block that's called 30. Now that will give me an extension equal to 30 degrees, and it is going to be the same every time. I take that screw and lock it down with a screwdriver so the blade does not move. But I do want to show you from the side and the front how that will look. That extension there in the honing guide is equal to 30 degrees by that extension right there at the honing guide. Here we are. We've got the board back in the vise. Now it's ready to hone. There are two stages to sharpening. Your first stage is your rough stage. Your second stage is your polishing stage. The first stage merely creates a new edge. The secondary stage polishes that edge to a mirror finish. How do we know when the first stage is done? Well, the best way to describe that is when at the back of the blade that you raise a burr. Make sure when you set the blade in the honing guide that the bevel is facing down, in other words facing to the wheel, because we're always going to hone the bevel. You never want to hone the back of the blade at 30 degrees. Take a bit of water and simply spritz the stone. Starting on your 1000 grit stone, you shouldn't need much more than about 3 or 4 backstrokes to raise a burr. And at the back of the blade, I'll be able to feel for the burr, and yes, I do feel it. Once I've raised that burr, I'm done with the 1000 grit stone. Move that to the side, take my 8000 grit stone. Notice that these Sharpening stones are bone dry before I use them. There's not a bit of water on there. You can see there's no shine, there's no moisture. And they work fast and they're very hard. They don't dish easily, therefore they don't need flattening as often as a softer clay-based stone. So I just simply spritz the surface before I want to use it. Place the wheel down first, then the blade. And here, because the stone is about 8 times finer than the 1000 grit, 8000 versus 1000, you're going to need a lot more than just 3 or 4 strokes. Typically, I like to suggest 10 or 15 strokes to end up polishing the burr. The bevel, the secondary bevel. Now, let's see if you can see that. You'll notice at the very edge, a polished little line. After the 1000 grit, it does not look like a mirror. It looks merely bright. But now it's going to look like a mirror at the edge of that blade. Then it's right. So you can look carefully, make sure you don't see any cloudiness in that secondary bevel. When it's bright and shiny, you know you're done. If we weren't doing this long video, this process would have taken you about 30 seconds at the stones. Alright, so we've just finished with that 8000 grit stone. The secondary bevel is polished. The burr, however, is still at the back. Smaller than it was before, but still there. So now we take a thin ruler, thin steel ruler. If you're using a ruler, make sure you're always using the same ruler. So it's the same thickness every time. This ruler is placed at the edge of the stone. Then the blade first on the ruler and then down so that the edge is in a narrow band of about 3 millimeters from the side of the stone, or 1/8 of an inch. And we're now going to carefully just slide on that ruler, 2 strokes and then off, and that polishes the bevel, the back of the blade. It polishes away the burr. So now that blade is completely sharp, back and bevel. We're now going to take one more take on this from the side so that you can see what this process looks like from the side. We'll do it fast, in about 30 seconds to 1 minute. Taking the blade and the honing guide, having the blade extending out more than we really need, finger tight so it's not loose, up to the 30-degree stop, slide the honing guide to the side of the jig, tighten it down, take the 1000 grit stone, give it a spritz, Place the wheel down first, then the blade. A good 3 or 4 heavy back strokes. Feel for the burr. Yes, I can feel the burr. Looking at the stone at the edge, I can see it's bright, but not polished. Now the 8000 grit stone. Give it a spritz. Wheel down first, then blade. 10 or 15 good strokes. Now the edge is polished like a mirror. It's still a small burr. Move the blade. Take the thin ruler. This particular ruler is 18 thousandths of an inch thick. Blade on the ruler first, within a narrow band of about 1/8 from the side of the stone. Keep the blade consistently there. Move about 2 strokes and then off. That polishes the back of the blade at the edge. Polishes the back of the blade right at the edge. So now we have polish, intersecting polish, sharp blade.